Been another week when the end of the pandemic seems as far away as ever, frankly, and I wonder how you're feeling at the moment. Is the lockdown proving stressful? What can you do to help with anxiety? Howard Edmunds is from the Brighton Therapy Centre, and I'm delighted to say he's back with us on the show this morning. Good morning to you.
Morning, Mark.
It's very interesting looking at a couple of the supplements today. Front of the Daily Telegraph, The Happiness Professor's Guide to Surviving and Thriving in a Crazy World. The front of the weekend edition of The Times, How to Be Happy Now, What to Say to Anxious Children and Simple Coping Methods to Try. There's a lot of this about at the moment. People are looking for help and they're looking for advice.
Absolutely. It's in a way, it's an opportunity for us because our normal coping mechanisms have been taken away. So we're needing to stop and think a bit more carefully about what we do to stay well. I think last week we were talking about the basics, which are really good to remember: exercise, hydrating. I talked about progressive muscle relaxation, which is a really good one. People can look that up online. And keeping in touch with people. The thing that struck me, I've been thinking about it since then, and of course one of the things that you learn from being a therapist over the years is you realise that one of the factors that determines how healthy people are is how long it takes them to reach out for help when they're distressed. And typically, when people are struggling, some of us are good at it and some of us take a bit longer. Psychotherapy, talking to someone like me, it could be simply just thinking about who is there that I trust, who I feel I can open up with, who I can just talk about these ordinary day-to-day worries, these things that are bothering me, getting me down.
What are some of the reasons that people take a while to come forward for help? Because, I mean, I don't know. If you take a really simple example, if you cut your finger, you rush to the first aid box and you stick a plaster on it. But when it comes to our mental health, people perhaps aren't necessarily that forward.
That's right. I mean, often people say when they come and see me, they say, God, if I'd broken my leg, it would have been so much easier. Everybody would have been, understanding the difficulties I'm having. But when people are experiencing anxiety or depression, it tends to be a bit harder to find somebody to confide in. One of the things that's changed, I think, generally with COVID is that we're all anxious to some extent. We're all affected. We're all in it together. And in that way, it opens the possibility of people sharing more with each other. And one of the things that I've been thinking about is what happens in groups where people are living together, and what people can do if they're living on their own. And people living in a group, like the family group, one of the things that really works is to have a kind of chance to check in with everybody over a meal or a weekly family meeting, and that way you'd be surprised living with people if you create a bit of time and you say, well, let's go round and we'll have a couple of minutes each just to say how we're getting on, how we found the week. You'd be surprised that people you live with will come out with things you didn't realise that they were feeling or thinking about how they're coping.
It's really interesting, actually, because a lot of focus, I think quite rightly, is being placed upon those who are living on their own. I guess there are advantages and disadvantages to both, because as you quite rightly say, if you're in a situation where at the moment you're literally being forced together because of the coronavirus and you're currently spending 24/7 with someone who perhaps, the marriage might not be in the best possible situation, or even because you've got your kids at home all day, every day, that there are advantages and disadvantages to being on your own or in a group.
That's right. I mean, we're social animals, so immediately, if you put people on their own for long periods of time, they'll start to feel stressed and anxious. Hence the solitary confinement punishment in prison is the worst thing you can do to someone. So of course, on the one hand, people who are suddenly on their own may find that their stress levels are going up, and might be quite puzzled by it, because they're just coping, but being on your own in itself is quite difficult. But at the same time, of course, it is easily remedied by picking up the phone, speaking to someone, maybe someone you haven't spoken to for a while, or reaching out to people. Because I think there's very few of us don't have somebody that we know that we can have a chat with. And then on the other side, of course, you've got people who feel too close, where they're all thrown together and maybe in a house share or in a family situation, as you mentioned. And I was thinking particularly about young people in house shares and students who got stuck. They can't get home, or they're living in house shares. And that's another situation where I think having some sort of way of coming together and also dealing with conflict is going to be really important as this continues.
Yeah, and just finally, if people want to get the help or advice from a professional rather than maybe just talking to their friend or neighbour, and again, those essentially any conversation is good for somebody who's feeling low. But if they want to get professional help or advice, what's the best way forward? Is it via your GP? Do you go direct to a centre? What would you suggest?
Well, there's a number of things you can do. I mean, it's always good to go online and look up what's local, what's available. A lot of services, including Brighton Therapy Centre, have now gone online. So we're offering all our therapies through phone or video call. So actually, it's very easy to access, and we offer a sliding scale to help to make therapy more accessible. You can still go to your GP, and people aren't, but actually GPs are saying that they're seeing less people, and they're a bit worried. They'd rather people came and spoke to them. And again, with the GP, I think most of the appointments now are through phone call. So actually, it's some ways it's easier to reach out and talk to somebody. I was talking to a young woman last week who she was saying, actually, it's easier talking to you on the phone than it would have been coming in to see you in the centre. So, it kind of, in some ways, it's getting easier for us to reach out.
Yeah, very good indeed. Thank you so much for coming back onto the programme this morning with some really, really useful advice. And the key message there, of course, is please do not suffer in silence. Howard Edmunds there from the Brighton Therapy Centre.